For generations, the image is seared into our collective memory, a masked rider, gallantly astride a magnificent white stallion, thundering across the dusty plains of the Old West. And right beside him, his steadfast companion, the silent, sagacious scout, a figure of stoic dignity and unwavering loyalty. This was Tonto, the legendary sidekick, the silent observer who often knew more than he let on, the moral compass to the Lone Ranger's justice. For millions, he was a hero, a symbol, etched into the bedrock of American television history. But the man who brought Tonto to life, the groundbreaking actor whose face became synonymous with this iconic Native American character, carried a burden far heavier than any fictional adventure. He smiled for the cameras, uttered his memorable lines, and rode into the sunset. But behind that impassive expression, behind the buckskin and feathers, raged a silent storm of injustice, indignity, and profound personal struggle. This was Jay Silverheels, a full-blooded Mohawk who made history as the first Native American to portray a Native character on mainstream television, blazing a trail that was both celebrated and deeply problematic. He was an accomplished athlete, a decorated wrestler, and a man of immense talent and quiet strength, who stepped into the role of Tonto and inadvertently became a pawn in a larger, often cruel cultural narrative. His fame was undeniable, his face instantly recognizable across the globe. He was a pioneer, a trailblazer, yet the very role that brought him renown would also become his torment. The public adored him, hailed him as an icon. But Jay Silverheels knew a truth the cameras never captured. In 1957, amidst the height of his fame, when asked about the character that defined his career, a character beloved by millions, Jay Silverheels offered a brutally honest, gut-wrenching summation that shattered the myth. Just 3 words, delivered with a quiet resignation that spoke volumes about his inner turmoil. Tonto is stupid. Think about that for a moment. The man who breathed life into this character, who imbued him with a dignity often lacking in the script, publicly declared his creation, his legacy, as stupid. It wasn't a flippant remark. It was a piercing indictment, a raw expression of the deep psychological toll his famous role had taken. It was the sound of a man screaming in silence, a cry for understanding from behind the very mask that had made him famous. How could a figure so revered, so central to an iconic story, be reduced to such a painful assessment by the very actor who portrayed him? The answer lies buried beneath layers of systemic racism, exploitation, and a heartbreaking disregard for his heritage and his humanity. Jay Silverheels wasn't just expressing an opinion, he was unveiling a reality that television audiences were never meant to see. He was exposing the insidious nature of typecasting, the demeaning stereotypes he was forced to perpetuate, the sheer indignity of being paid half of what his white co-star earned for an equally demanding role. He was hinting at the physical confrontations on set, where a director once attempted to attack him, underscoring the hostile environment he often navigated. And perhaps most poignantly, he was subtly protesting the very name he was given, Tonto, a term that in Spanish translates to fool or stupid, a label he could never truly escape, an insidious mockery embedded into the fabric of his public identity. Today, we peel back the layers of Hollywood's gilded facade to uncover the true story of Jay Silverheels. We delve into the profound suffering that lay behind that enduring smile, the systemic injustices he silently endured, and the courageous spirit of a man who fought to maintain his dignity in a world determined to diminish him. This isn't just a story about a television character. It's the raw, unvarnished truth about the man who brought Tonto to life, a man whose legacy deserves to be understood, celebrated, and finally truly heard. Prepare to see the Lone Ranger and its iconic sidekick in an entire new light, as we unveil what really happened to Jay Silverheels. To truly understand the man behind the makeup, the individual who had come to define a generation's perception of Native Americans on screen, we must journey back, far beyond the dusty trails of the Wild West and the familiar whinny of silver. We must rewind the clock to a time before Hollywood ever cast its shimmering, often deceptive glow upon him, to a place rooted deep in the rich soil of his ancestry, the 6 nations of the Grand River First Nation in Ontario, Canada. Here, in 1912, a boy named Harold J. Smith entered the world, a full-blooded Mohawk, destined for a life far removed from the expectations of his birth. Harold's early years were steeped in the traditions and resilience of his Mohawk heritage. The Six Nations Confederacy, or Haudenosaunee, is one of the oldest living participatory democracies on Earth, a testament to complex governance and cultural richness. To be born into this community was to inherit a legacy of strength, intellectual depth, and an unwavering connection to the land and its stories. His Mohawk lineage wasn't just a label, it was the bedrock of his identity, shaping his worldview, his quiet dignity, and the profound sense of self that would later clash so sharply with the caricatures he was often asked to portray. He grew up surrounded by a culture that valued community, oral tradition, and a deep respect for natural order, principles that would undoubtedly inform his character and his moral compass throughout his extraordinary life. But Harold J. Smith wasn't merely a quiet observer of his heritage, he was an active participant, a young man of remarkable physical prowess and competitive spirit. Long before he ever faced a camera, he was already a champion, carving out a reputation in two intensely demanding sports, wrestling and lacrosse. Lacrosse in particular held a profound significance. Known among the Haudenosaunee as the creator's game, it's far more than a sport. It's a spiritual practice, a powerful expression of culture and warrior tradition. Playing lacrosse demanded not just incredible athleticism, but also strategic thinking, teamwork, and an almost poetic fluidity of movement. Harold excelled at it, demonstrating a natural aptitude for the game that propelled him to professional leagues. Imagine the young Harold, stick in hand, moving with grace and power across the field, his movements precise, his focus unyielding. This was a man already accustomed to the spotlight, to the roar of a crowd, to the discipline required to master a craft. The intense physical conditioning, the mental fortitude to endure grueling matches, and the innate showmanship required to engage an audience all were honed on the lacrosse fields and wrestling mats of North America. His journey as a professional wrestler, often under the moniker the Indian Chief, further broadened his horizons and deepened his understanding of performance. This wasn't just about raw strength. It was about theatricality, about crafting a persona, about telling a story through movement and expression. He toured extensively, facing opponents in smoky arenas and packed gymnasiums across Canada and the United States. Each match was a mini-drama, a carefully choreographed battle that captivated audiences. He learned to control his body, to project emotion, to command attention without uttering a single word. These were invaluable lessons, perhaps unknowingly, for the career that lay ahead. He was building a robust physical presence, a formidable stage presence, and an intimate understanding of how to connect with an audience long before Hollywood ever entered the picture. And yet, despite his athletic triumphs, a different kind of strength defined another significant chapter of his early life, his career as an ironworker. For generations, Mohawk men from communities like Six Nations, Kahnawake, and Akwesasne had earned a revered, if perilous, reputation as skywalkers or high steel men. They possessed an uncanny ability to navigate dizzying heights, to balance on narrow beams hundreds of feet above the city streets, fearlessly constructing the skeletal frameworks of America's iconic skyscrapers and bridges. This wasn't merely a job, it was a testament to extraordinary courage, balance, and a deep-seated trust in one's own abilities and in the men working beside you. Harold J. Smith joined these ranks, risking life and limb to literally build the modern world. Imagine him, high above the ground, a silhouetted figure against the vast expanse of the sky, maneuvering heavy steel with a precision born of innate skill and intense focus. This dangerous profession further forged his character, instilling an almost impenetrable resilience, a quiet determination, and an unflappable demeanor in the face of immense pressure. So, how did a champion Mohawk lacrosse player, a touring professional wrestler, and a fearless high-steel ironworker find his way to the nascent film industry of Hollywood? It was an unlikely trajectory, certainly, but one that makes perfect sense when we connect the dots. The skills he had cultivated, the physical prowess and striking physique from sports, the showmanship from wrestling, the discipline and mental toughness from both and from ironworking, were in many ways tailor-made for the silver screen. The allure of Hollywood, even then, was undeniable. For many, it represented an escape from economic hardship, a chance at a different kind of life than what was readily available on the reserves or in the dangerous trades. For Harold, who had already seen much of the continent through his athletic endeavors, the westward pull was perhaps a natural extension of his ambitious spirit. He wasn't passively waiting for opportunity, he was actively seeking it. He understood the power of performance, the draw of a captivating presence. While the exact moment of his decision to trade the wrestling ring and the steel girder for the soundstage remains somewhat shrouded, it was almost certainly a culmination of his experiences. He had developed a formidable physical presence, a distinctive look, and a quiet confidence that would have stood out. The film industry, constantly hungry for new faces, particularly those deemed authentic or exotic for various roles, would have found him compelling. His ambition wasn't about fleeting fame, it was about leveraging his talents, about finding a new arena in which to excel. He carried with him the quiet strength of his Mohawk ancestors, the unwavering discipline of a champion athlete, and the courage of an ironworker who had stared down vertigo from impossible heights. These were the qualities of Harold J. Smith, the man before the myth, the individual whose rich life experiences would profoundly shape his entry into Hollywood. Long before a singular, iconic, and ultimately complex role would overshadow everything that came before. He arrived in Tinseltown not as an empty vessel waiting to be filled, but as a fully formed individual, brimming with talent, resilience, and a deep-seated identity that would subtly yet powerfully influence every performance he gave, even as the industry tried to mold him into something else entirely. The final years of the 1940s and the dawn of the 1950s ushered in a transformative era for America, a landscape brimming with a unique blend of post-war optimism and burgeoning new anxieties. The victorious end of World War II had ignited a powerful sense of national pride and economic boom. Soldiers returned home, eager to build families, purchase houses in burgeoning suburbs, and embrace the comforts of a consumer-driven society. This was an age of unparalleled hope and a yearning for stability, but beneath the surface, the Cold War was beginning to cast its long, ominous shadow, creating a subtle undercurrent of uncertainty and a desire for clear-cut narratives of good versus evil. In this dynamic cultural crucible, a new medium was rapidly seizing the nation's imagination: television. No longer just a novelty, the flickering black and white screen was quickly becoming the focal point of the American living room, promising to bring entertainment, news, and a shared cultural experience directly into homes. It was a medium ripe for storytelling, for creating heroes and adventures that could capture the collective imagination of a nation both looking forward and clinging to a romanticized vision of its past. And few genres resonated more deeply with the American psyche during this period than the Western. The Western, in its myriad forms across literature, film, and radio, had long served as a powerful vehicle for exploring themes of justice, freedom, and the taming of the wilderness. It offered a comforting, often sanitized vision of American history, populated by courageous lawmen, dastardly outlaws, and the vast, untamed frontier. For a nation grappling with its own identity in a rapidly changing world, these tales provided a reassuring moral compass, a world where right always triumphed and heroes embodied unwavering integrity. It was against this backdrop that one particular Western, already a radio phenomenon, made its fateful leap to the small screen, forever etching itself into the annals of American pop culture: The Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger had been a radio sensation since 1933, captivating millions with the adventures of a masked Texas Ranger and his faithful Native American companion. The transition to television was a monumental undertaking, but one handled with keen foresight by producer George W. Trendle and writer Fran Stryker. They understood the visual potential of the Western, the inherent drama of horses thundering across open plains, the iconic imagery of the masked rider and his silver bullets. Launched in 1949 on the nascent ABC network, the television series wasn't just popular, it was an absolute juggernaut. From its very first episode, The Lone Ranger became a cultural touchstone. Families gathered around their television sets, mesmerized by the adventures of the stoic hero and his loyal sidekick. Its popularity soared, transforming it into a flagship program for ABC, which at the time was the smallest of the three major networks. The show spawned an empire of merchandise, from lunchboxes and cowboy outfits to comic books and toys. Its iconic theme music, Rossini's William Tell Overture, became instantly recognizable, synonymous with heroism and adventure. Catchphrases like "Hi-oh, Silver, away!" and the Lone Ranger's steadfast dedication to justice echoed in playgrounds and living rooms across the nation. For a generation of children, The Lone Ranger wasn't just a television show. It was a moral compass, a thrilling escape, and a foundational narrative of what it meant to be a hero in the American West. Crucial to the show's enduring appeal, second only to the mysterious masked man himself, was his devoted companion, Tonto. The casting of this role was paramount. Tonto needed to embody a specific archetype, stoic, wise in the ways of nature, unwavering in his loyalty, and perpetually by the Lone Ranger's side. The search for an actor who could bring this meticulously crafted character to life led the producers to a man whose real name was Harold J. Smith, a full-blooded Mohawk from the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, Canada. This man, who would soon be known to millions as Jay Silverheels, possessed a natural dignity and a striking physical presence that immediately set him apart. Before The Lone Ranger, Silverheels had a diverse career. He was an accomplished athlete, excelling in lacrosse and wrestling, even competing professionally. His path to Hollywood had been a gradual one, paved with numerous uncredited or minor roles, often typecasting him as generic Indian characters in a string of B-westerns. He'd been Indian chief, Indian brave, Comanche warrior, a seemingly endless parade of nameless two-dimensional figures. But when he auditioned for Tonto, something clicked. His quiet strength, his piercing gaze, and an inherent grace lent an authenticity to the character that producers sought. Here was a genuinely Native American man, bringing his heritage, albeit filtered through a Hollywood lens, to a prominent Native role on network television. It was, in one sense, a trailblazing moment, a significant step forward in on-screen representation. Yet, in a profound and ultimately painful irony, the very role that brought him fame and broke through the barriers of anonymity would also trap him within the confines of a deeply problematic stereotype. The character of Tonto, as conceived in the radio show and faithfully translated to television, was a product of the prevailing, often demeaning, stereotypes of Native Americans in media at the time. He epitomized what scholars would later term the noble savage trope, a figure seen as close to nature, possessing innate wisdom and tracking skills, yet ultimately subservient, less complex, and less civilized than his white counterpart. Tonto's dialogue was famously simplistic, often delivered in broken English, reducing him to a caricature. Phrases like "kemosabe," a word whose exact origin and meaning are still debated, though often presented as meaning trusty scout or faithful friend, and the frequent use of "me go" or "him do" were not accidental. They were deliberate choices designed to portray Tonto as less articulate, less educated, and thus, implicitly, less intelligent than the Lone Ranger. This linguistic infantilization was a pervasive and demeaning trope that stripped Native characters of their true intellectual capacity and cultural richness. Furthermore, Tonto was unequivocally a sidekick. His existence within the narrative was primarily to support the white hero. He rarely drove the plot, rarely had independent motivations or desires that weren't tied to the Lone Ranger's mission of justice. His emotions were generally muted, his internal life unexplored. He was an archetype, a function, rather than a fully developed character with agency and depth. This racial hierarchy was an unspoken but powerful message embedded in the show's DNA. Native Americans were to be loyal allies, guides to the wilderness, but never the central figures, never the saviors, never truly equal partners in the grand narrative of the West. This portrayal was a direct descendant of the dime novels and Wild West shows of earlier generations, which had consistently depicted native peoples as either bloodthirsty savages or childlike, simplistic figures, all serving to diminish their cultures and justify the historical displacement and subjugation they had endured. Despite the inherent limitations and problematic nature of the role, Silverheels brought a remarkable dignity to Tonto. He infused the character with a quiet strength and an unmistakable presence that transcended the often demeaning dialogue. He played Tonto with conviction, making him believable and endearing to millions. And audiences, for the most part, adored him. The dynamic duo of the masked rider and his Native American companion quickly became an inseparable part of American folklore. Children across the country would don makeshift masks and feather headbands, galloping around their backyards shouting, "Hi-yo, Silver!" and mimicking Tonto's distinctive gait and stoic demeanor. Critics of the era, caught up in the spectacle and the show's family-friendly appeal, largely overlooked or simply accepted the stereotypical portrayals as part and parcel of the Western genre. The focus was on entertainment, moral lessons, and the thrill of adventure, not on nuanced cultural representation. Tonto, thanks to Silverheels' portrayal, became an icon, his image ingrained in the popular consciousness as the quintessential Native American sidekick. But beneath the surface of this overwhelming success and cultural embrace lay a profound and growing conflict for Jay Silverheels. The role that had given him unprecedented visibility also became a cage. He was celebrated, but for embodying a caricature. The public perception of Tonto became inextricably linked to Silverheels the man, making it difficult for him to ever fully escape the shadow of the simplistic character. This constant demand to embody a role that offered fame but perpetuated harmful images would weigh heavily on him. The immense popularity and critical acceptance of Tonto's stereotypical portrayal only served to deepen the quiet struggle Silverheels faced, not only with the demeaning aspects of the character, but also with the very real, often hidden inequities he experienced on set. All the while, the disparity in pay, the casual disrespect, the internal resentment simmering within him were festering in silence, laying the groundwork for the future revelation that, behind the iconic smile and unwavering loyalty of Tonto, Jay Silverheels was a man quietly suffering, trapped between the demands of a groundbreaking role and the deep personal cost of playing a stupid Indian. The moment Jay Silverheels rode onto screens as Tonto, something monumental shifted in the landscape of American television. It was instantaneous, a phenomenon that captured the collective imagination of a nation. Children, clutching imaginary tomahawks and sporting makeshift headbands, would gallop through suburban backyards, their spirited cries echoing a singular name, Kamosabe. Tonto wasn't just a character, he was an icon, a household name, an indelible part of the cultural fabric that defined the burgeoning television era. His stoic loyalty, his quiet wisdom, his signature broken English all coalesced into a persona that resonated deeply with millions. Overnight, Jay Silverheels became a celebrity, a face instantly recognizable from coast to coast. The fan mail poured in by the truckload, letters from admirers young and old expressing adoration, admiration, and a profound connection to the silent, steadfast companion of the Lone Ranger. He attended countless public appearances, shaking hands, signing autographs, always with that gentle, approachable demeanor, the one that masked so much beneath the surface. For a Native American actor in an industry that had historically relegated Indigenous performers to caricatures or extras, this was unprecedented. Jay Silverheels had achieved a level of recognition and success that no Indigenous actor before him could have dreamed of. He was, by all outward appearances, living the dream, basking in the glow of a golden age of television stardom. Yet, as with so many dazzling facades, there was a profound and unsettling truth hidden just beneath the shimmering surface. This golden era of stardom, while providing unprecedented visibility and a degree of financial security, simultaneously constructed a cage around Jay Silverheels, a cage perhaps gilded and adorned, but a cage nonetheless. The role that had catapulted him to fame also confined him, limited him, and ultimately profoundly frustrated him. It was a paradox of the cruelest kind, celebrated for embodying a character that he himself found intellectually and culturally demeaning. The very definition of a golden cage came to life in his career. He was lauded, cherished, and forever typecast as Tonto, unable to truly break free from the constraints of the character. The industry, once it had found a profitable pigeonhole for him, seemed utterly unwilling or incapable of seeing him as anything more. He was Tonto, and Tonto was all he would ever be in the eyes of Hollywood. The weight of this paradox, the silent burden of a role that both elevated and diminished him, eventually found a voice in three simple yet profoundly revealing words. It was 1957, the very zenith of the Lone Ranger's popularity, when an interviewer, perhaps seeking insight into the actor's connection with his beloved character, asked Jay Silverheels about his most famous role. The response, delivered not with malice but with a weary honesty that spoke volumes, was stark. Tonto is stupid. Imagine the silence that must have followed those words. Imagine the discomfort, the flicker of surprise, perhaps even shock on the interviewer's face. This wasn't the heroic, stoic, devoted Tonto the public adored. This was a raw, unfiltered sentiment from the man who brought him to life. But what did he mean by Tonto is stupid? It wasn't merely an assessment of the character's intellectual capacity, though that was certainly part of it. It was a visceral outcry against the layers of simplification, misrepresentation, and outright denigration inherent in the portrayal. When Jay Silverheels uttered those words, he wasn't just criticizing a fictional character. He was articulating the immense personal toll of perpetuating a stereotype. He was a man of considerable intelligence, a former amateur wrestler, a sophisticated athlete, articulate and thoughtful in his private life. Yet on screen, he was reduced to a caricature who spoke in broken, monosyllabic English, often relying on grunts and pointed gestures, devoid of the complex inner life and sophisticated dialogue afforded to his white counterpart. Me Tonto, him Kemosabe, these were the verbal tools of his trade. He was denied the opportunity to deliver eloquent speeches, to express nuanced emotions through language, or to display genuine intellectual acumen. This linguistic simplification was a constant, gnawing frustration for Silverheels, who knew firsthand the richness and complexity of indigenous languages and communication styles. He understood that reducing a native character to such rudimentary speech patterns reinforced harmful stereotypes of indigenous peoples as less intelligent, less capable, and fundamentally other. Furthermore, Tonto was forever relegated to the position of sidekick, a loyal but subservient figure whose primary purpose was to assist and serve the white hero. He had no independent aspirations, no complex motivations beyond his unwavering devotion to the Lone Ranger. His agency was almost entirely derivative. He was a shadow, never the sun. This subservience, this eternal secondary role, was intellectually and culturally stifling for Silverheels. He knew the rich histories of leadership, resilience, and ingenuity within Native American communities. To portray a character so devoid of self-determination, so defined by his service to another, was a deep personal affront, a constant reminder of the societal hierarchies and racial biases that had historically marginalized indigenous peoples. He was forced to embody a narrative where indigenous intelligence and capability were always secondary, always assisting, never leading. The profound implications of Tonto is stupid stretched far beyond that single conversation. For Jay Silverheels, it was likely a rare, unguarded moment where his private anguish spilled into the public sphere. It was an expression of the constant, internal conflict he faced. The professional requirement to perform this beloved, iconic character versus the crushing personal toll of perpetuating stereotypes that devalued his own heritage and people. He had to don the buckskin, paint his face, and utter those simplified lines, knowing that every performance, every public appearance as Tonto further cemented a problematic image in the minds of millions. How did he navigate the adoration of countless fans who saw Tonto as a hero, while simultaneously grappling with the character's demeaning nature? It was a tightrope walk of immense emotional complexity. He smiled for the cameras, signed the autographs, played along with the fantasy, all the while carrying the weight of cultural misrepresentation on his broad shoulders. The words "Tonto is stupid" were not just a criticism of a character's intellect. They were a lament for the squandered potential, for the misrepresentation, and for the perpetuation of a narrative that held his people back rather than elevating them. It was the desperate cry of an artist trapped within the confines of a role that offered fame but denied dignity, creating a golden cage that glittered brightly but offered no true escape. While Jay Silverheels graced the screen with a stoic and often reassuring presence as Tonto, beneath that composed exterior lay a torrent of indignities, struggles, and outright exploitation that would have broken a lesser man. His on-screen persona, a loyal companion to the masked hero, belied the profound lack of respect and fairness he endured off-screen, a tragic testament to the systemic racism woven into the fabric of Hollywood during that era. The smile he offered to millions was often a mask, hiding a reality far darker than any villain the Lone Ranger ever faced. Perhaps one of the most glaring and indefensible injustices Jay Silverheels encountered was the staggering wage disparity that saw him paid a mere fraction of what his white co-star, Clayton Moore, received for portraying the Lone Ranger. It wasn't a slight difference, it was an economic chasm, a brutal affirmation of the industry's valuation of a Native American actor versus a white one. While Moore, as the titular hero, commanded a respectable salary, Silverheels, an equally pivotal character whose face was instantly recognizable to millions, was relegated to an income barely above subsistence. This wasn't merely unfair, it was a calculated, systemic act of economic exploitation, rooted deeply in the racial hierarchies prevalent in 1950s America, and, by extension, within the studio system. Native American actors, often lacking strong union protections or agents willing to fight aggressively on their behalf, found themselves in an incredibly vulnerable position. They were seen as interchangeable, their unique cultural backgrounds often reduced to stereotypical caricatures, making it easy for studios to leverage their power and pay them meagerly. For Silverheels, a man with a family to support, this meant that despite his immense popularity and the show's widespread success, he was perpetually operating from a place of financial insecurity. He was a television star, recognized in every household, yet he lived with a fraction of the comfort and stability enjoyed by his white peers. Imagine the psychological toll of knowing your talent, your contribution, and your very image were deemed worth so much less than that of the person standing beside you. It wasn't just about the money. It was a profound statement about his worth, his humanity, and his place in an industry that celebrated his image while devaluing his very existence. This disparity wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate structure, a microcosm of the broader societal inequalities that marginalize Native Americans, denying them equitable opportunities and fair compensation even when they were at the peak of their professional careers. Every paycheck was a reminder of this inherent injustice, a constant, nagging wound that no amount of on-screen heroism could heal. Beyond the insidious financial exploitation, Silverheels was subjected to overt acts of racial prejudice and mistreatment that painted a vivid picture of the hostile environment he often navigated. Among the more disturbing accounts from his time on the Lone Ranger set was an alleged incident where a director, in a fit of inexplicable rage, attempted to physically attack him. While the specifics of what triggered this alleged outburst remain shrouded in the murk of history, the very notion of a director attempting physical violence against an actor, especially a Native American actor in that era, speaks volumes about the power dynamics at play. Directors wielded immense authority on set, often acting as unchecked despots, and in a segregated society, a white director's word or perceived right to control was rarely questioned, particularly when dealing with actors from marginalized communities. For Silverheels, a dignified man of proud heritage, to face such an act of aggression would have been not only terrifying but profoundly humiliating. It highlights the precarious position Native American actors found themselves in. They were expected to embody stereotypical roles, endure microaggressions, and yet remain subservient, with little to no recourse against abuse. A physical assault, or even the attempt of one, transcends mere disrespect. It is an act designed to intimidate, to assert dominance, and to remind someone of their perceived place in a racial hierarchy. Silverheels, unlike his white counterparts, would have had very few avenues for protest or protection. Speaking out could have easily meant the end of his career, a blacklisting from an industry already hesitant to cast Native Americans in anything but token, often demeaning roles. This vulnerability was a constant companion, a heavy shadow cast over every interaction, every scene filmed. It's easy to imagine the palpable tension on set, the silent fear, the constant vigilance required to navigate such an overtly hostile environment. These were not just isolated incidents, they were symptoms of a broader industry culture that often viewed Native American actors as props rather than professionals, as expendable commodities rather than respected artists. The alleged assault was a stark, brutal reminder of the raw, unbridled prejudice that could erupt at any moment, shattering the illusion of the friendly, adventurous world depicted on screen. It forced Silverheels to internalize an immense amount of anger and frustration, emotions he likely had to suppress to maintain his career and ensure the livelihood of his family, contributing significantly to the quiet suffering he endured. And then there was the name itself, Tonto, a seemingly innocuous character name that, to anyone with a rudimentary understanding of Spanish, carried a profound and deeply insulting connotation. Tonto translates directly to fool or stupid. To impose such a name, laden with derogatory meaning, upon a Native American character portrayed by a Native American actor was an act of casual racism that was both insidious and incredibly damaging. For Jay Silverheels, an educated and articulate man, to be forced to embody a character whose very name was a linguistic insult was a crushing burden. Every time he heard the name, every time he responded to it, every time he saw it emblazoned on merchandise, he was confronted with this deeply ingrained prejudice. It wasn't just a character he played, it became a label that followed him, blurring the lines between the fictional sidekick and the real man. Imagine the psychological weight of knowing that millions of people, particularly children, were identifying you with a name that essentially called you unintelligent. This linguistic slap in the face compounded the already problematic nature of the character, which, despite Silverheels' attempts to imbue him with dignity, was often relegated to speaking in broken English and serving as a subservient sidekick. The name Tonto stripped away any pretense of respect for indigenous cultures or intellect, presenting an image of Native Americans as simple-minded or even foolish. For Silverheels, it was a constant battle against this dehumanizing label. He had to reconcile his own proud heritage and intelligence with a role that, by its very name, sought to diminish him. This internal conflict, the silent struggle to maintain his personal dignity while publicly embracing a role that undermined it, was undoubtedly one of the heaviest burdens he carried. It was a cruel irony that his most famous role, the one that brought him international recognition, was also a constant source of quiet humiliation, a daily reminder of the pervasive racism embedded within the very foundation of the character he brought to life. The name Tonto wasn't just a character choice, it was a cultural wound, inflicted repeatedly, deepening the silent suffering of the man behind the legendary mask. As the final credits rolled on The Lone Ranger in 1957, bringing an end to the television series that had defined a decade for Jay Silverheels, one might have imagined a sense of liberation. The shackles of Tonto, the character he had so often described as stupid, were seemingly off. But for Silverheels, the ending of the series was not a release into a world of diverse opportunities. It was merely a shift in the battleground. The mask was off, but the stereotype, stubbornly, remained. Hollywood, with its ingrained biases and limited imagination, seemed incapable of seeing him as anything other than the stoic, monosyllabic sidekick. He yearned for more. Jay Silverheels was a multifaceted individual, a former Golden Gloves boxer, a decorated athlete, a thoughtful individual with a deep connection to his Mohawk heritage. He understood the nuances of human experience, the complexities of emotion, the spectrum of character. Yet the roles presented to him were depressingly familiar. The nameless warrior, the silent tracker, the wise elder whose wisdom was often conveyed through grunts rather than genuine dialogue. He diligently pursued auditions, often finding himself in rooms where the very notion of a Native American playing anything other than a brave or a chief was met with polite but firm resistance. Producers and casting directors, conditioned by decades of Hollywood tropes, struggled to envision him as a doctor, a lawyer, a loving father in a contemporary setting, or even a nuanced antagonist. The industry's limitations were not just a barrier to his personal artistic growth, they were a systemic affront to the dignity and breadth of Indigenous peoples. Despite these significant setbacks, Silverheels refused to be confined. He continued to work, accepting roles that, while still often typecast, sometimes offered a glimmer of expanded humanity. He appeared in films like Alias Jesse James, The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing, and various television series, often bringing a quiet dignity and gravitas to even the most underwritten parts. His hope was that by consistently showing up, by delivering professional, understated performances, he might subtly chip away at the monolithic image of the Hollywood Indian. He sought out opportunities in theater, understanding that the stage often allowed for a deeper exploration of character than the silver screen or television of the era. He recognized that for the industry to change, it needed a fundamental shift in perception, not just for him, but for all Native American actors. This profound understanding of the systemic issues fueled one of his most significant and enduring contributions, the establishment of the Indian Actors Workshop in Los Angeles in the early 1960s. Silverheels wasn't just content to complain about the problem, he set out to be a part of the solution. He saw a glaring void. Talented Native individuals were not given the training, the networking opportunities, or the cultural support needed to navigate the treacherous waters of Hollywood. Many aspiring Native American actors were being asked to portray caricatures of their own cultures, often without proper guidance or even respect for their traditions. The workshop was his direct answer to this dilemma. Imagine, if you will, the vision behind this pioneering initiative. Jay Silverheels, a man who had personally experienced the frustrations of typecasting and cultural misrepresentation, decided to create a safe harbor, a launching pad for future generations. He wasn't just lending his name, he was actively involved, dedicating his time, his experience, and his meager financial resources to its operation. The workshop aimed to achieve several critical objectives. Firstly, it sought to provide professional acting training, equipping students with the fundamental skills of stagecraft, voice modulation, movement, and character development, skills that transcended the limited demands of playing a generic Indian. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, it emphasized cultural authenticity. Silverheels understood that true representation meant drawing from the rich tapestry of Indigenous cultures, not the shallow stereotypes concocted by non-native writers. He encouraged students to explore their own heritage, to bring that authenticity to their performances, and to challenge producers and directors who asked for inaccurate portrayals. The Indian Actors Workshop became a vibrant hub. It was a place where Native American aspiring performers could learn from experienced professionals, including Silverheels himself, and gain confidence in their craft. It offered a sense of community, allowing these actors to connect with one another, share their struggles, and collectively work towards a more equitable future in entertainment. They practiced scenes, developed monologues, learned about the business side of acting, and crucially, found their voice. This was revolutionary for its time, predating many similar initiatives focused on diversity in Hollywood. Silverheels' vision was clear. By training skilled, culturally aware Native actors, they would not only be better equipped to secure roles, but to advocate for more truthful and respectful portrayals from within the industry. He believed that the power to change perceptions lay in part with the quality and integrity of the performances themselves. Beyond the workshop, Silverheels was a quiet but persistent advocate. In interviews, whenever given the chance, he would steer the conversation towards the need for greater understanding and accurate depiction of Native Americans. He spoke about the damage caused by stereotypes, the erosion of cultural identity, and the missed opportunities for compelling storytelling.
He attended industry events, often engaging in conversations behind the scenes, subtly pushing for change. His advocacy wasn't always loud or confrontational. It was often expressed through his steadfast presence, his unwavering commitment to his community, and the simple act of showing up year after year, refusing to let the industry forget that Indigenous talent existed and deserved better.
The struggles were immense. Funding for the workshop was always a challenge, and the industry's pace of change was glacial. Silverheels saw countless talented individuals face the same walls of prejudice and limited imagination that he himself had encountered. He witnessed the frustration, the disillusionment, and the slow erosion of hope in many who dared to dream of a career in acting. Yet, through it all, his own hope remained an unshakable beacon. He held on to the belief that one day the industry would evolve, that the stories of Indigenous peoples would be told with the richness, depth, and respect they deserved. He envisioned a future where a Native actor could play any role, not just those predefined by colonial narratives. Jay Silverheels' post-Lone Ranger life was a testament to his incredible resilience and unwavering dedication to his community. He could have simply faded away, accepting the comfortable retirement that his iconic role might have afforded him. Instead, he chose to continue the fight, to champion future generations, and to lay the groundwork for the increased, albeit still insufficient, representation we see today. He was not just an actor, he was a pioneer, an educator, and an advocate whose impact stretched far beyond the confines of a television screen, forever altering the landscape for Native Americans in entertainment, proving that even after the mask comes off, the true spirit of a warrior continues to lead the way. In the cold light of contemporary scrutiny, the legacy of Jay Silverheels presents us with a fascinating, often uncomfortable dichotomy. We are compelled to reevaluate his towering presence in early television not through the rose-tinted lens of nostalgic adoration, but with the incisive, critical tools forged by decades of Indigenous activism and media studies. He stands simultaneously as a groundbreaking pioneer who chipped away at the impenetrable walls of Hollywood for Native American actors, and as a poignant symbol of the very stereotypes and systemic injustices that continue to plague Indigenous representation to this day. It's a complex truth that forces us to grapple with the uncomfortable realities of history, recognizing that figures can be both heroes and victims, agents of change and products of their restrictive eras. On one hand, there is no denying the profound impact Jay Silverheels had as a trailblazer. Before him, the landscape of television was virtually devoid of authentic Native American faces portraying Native characters. Hollywood's portrayal of Indigenous peoples was almost exclusively through white actors in redface, a practice that not only erased Native talent but propagated grotesque caricatures. Silverheels, an actual Mohawk man, shattered that glass ceiling. His consistent presence on The Lone Ranger week after week, beamed into millions of homes, provided a visual touchstone that had simply not existed before. For countless Native children and families, seeing someone who looked like them, however flawed the portrayal, was a moment of profound recognition, a glimmer of possibility in an industry that had largely rendered them invisible or villainous. He opened a door, however narrow, for future generations, inspiring countless aspiring actors and reminding the world that Native people were real, present, and capable of commanding an audience. He endured unimaginable pressures, navigated a racist system, and managed to forge a career that, by sheer longevity and visibility, carved out a space where none had existed. Yet, we cannot fully appreciate his legacy without confronting the painful paradox embedded within it, the character of Tonto. Tonto is stupid, Silverheels famously said, encapsulating the deep-seated frustration and humiliation he experienced. The character, with his broken English, subservient demeanor, and often simplistic worldview, became the quintessential noble savage trope, a sidekick whose primary function was to serve the white hero. This portrayal, amplified by the immense popularity of The Lone Ranger, etched a deeply problematic stereotype into the American consciousness, one that persisted for decades and continues to inform harmful perceptions of Indigenous peoples. For many, particularly within Native American communities, Tonto represents the historical subjugation, the dehumanization, and the lack of agency imposed upon Indigenous identity by mainstream media. It's a symbol of forced assimilation, of being relegated to the periphery, stripped of complexity and voice. This dual nature of Silverheels' contribution makes him a central figure in the ongoing critical discourse surrounding Native American representation in media. His story resonates deeply with current struggles for self-determination and accurate portrayal, echoing in the voices of Indigenous filmmakers, writers, and activists today. Modern movements for authentic Indigenous storytelling look back at Tonto, and by extension, at Silverheels' experiences, not just as a historical artifact, but as a living lesson. They highlight how the constraints he faced, the low pay, the lack of creative control, the pressure to conform to dehumanizing stereotypes, are precisely what they are fighting to dismantle. They strive to move beyond the one-dimensional depictions, the spiritual warrior or the tragic victim, to embrace the rich diversity, modernity, and sovereignty of Native nations and individuals. His life informs, with vivid clarity, the modern efforts to create authentic and respectful Native American narratives on screen. When a contemporary Native director insists on hiring Indigenous writers, bringing in cultural consultants, or ensuring that a character speaks an Indigenous language correctly, they are, in essence, correcting the historical wrongs embodied by Silverheels' situation. They are asserting the right to self-definition, something he was largely denied. His struggles with the name Tonto, meaning fool or stupid in Spanish, and the indignity of his paychecks, half of what his white co-star earned, serve as powerful reminders of the systemic inequities that still need to be addressed in Hollywood's hiring and compensation practices. Ultimately, Jay Silverheels' story forces society to grapple with the complexities of historical figures, who were both agents of change and victims of their time. It challenges us to hold contradictory truths simultaneously, to honor his courage and pioneering spirit while unflinchingly critiquing the damaging stereotypes he was forced to embody. This process of reevaluation is not about canceling history, but about understanding it more fully, with all its nuances and painful legacies. It's about acknowledging the sacrifices made by individuals like Silverheels, recognizing the limitations of their era, and drawing vital lessons to build a more equitable and authentically representative future for Indigenous peoples on screen and beyond. His complex legacy serves as a constant, necessary reminder that progress is rarely linear, and the fight for true representation is an ongoing journey. Jay Silverheels, the man who breathed life into Tonto, stands as a complex and profoundly impactful figure in the annals of Hollywood history. His journey, as we've meticulously explored, wasn't merely a tale of an actor finding fame. It was a deeply layered narrative of pioneering achievement intertwined with immense personal sacrifice and an enduring testament to systemic injustice. He was, after all, the first Native American actor to portray a Native character as a series regular on television, a monumental step forward, a time when such roles were almost exclusively given to white actors in redface. This fact alone secures his place as a trailblazer, a barrier breaker whose very presence on screen challenged prevailing norms, even if subtly at first. Yet, this groundbreaking success came at an immense and often hidden cost. The iconic image of Tonto, the loyal sidekick to the Lone Ranger, became both his greatest triumph and, paradoxically, his heaviest burden. Behind the stoic demeanor and the famous kemosabe, Jay Silverheels harbored a truth he could only hint at, a quiet anguish that occasionally surfaced in stark declarations like, "Tonto is stupid." These three words, uttered almost offhandedly years after the show's peak, weren't just a simple critique of a character. They were a profound indictment of an entire system that relentlessly pigeonholed him, stripped his character of dignity, and reduced his rich cultural heritage to a simplistic, often demeaning stereotype. He was forced to embody a portrayal he intimately knew was reductive, simplistic, and, frankly, insulting to his people and his heritage. His experience wasn't an isolated incident, but a stark mirror reflecting the broader inequities and racial disparities rampant throughout the entertainment industry of his era. The revelation that he earned half of what his white co-star did for essentially equal screen time, or the horrifying account of a director attempting to physically attack him on set, are not mere anecdotes. They are stark, visceral reminders of the power imbalances and racial injustices that actors from marginalized communities, particularly Native Americans, routinely endured. These were not just professional slights. They were deeply personal affronts to his worth, his talent, and his fundamental humanity. The very name Tonto itself, with its problematic Spanish meaning, became an inescapable symbol of the cultural insensitivity and appropriation he battled throughout his career, a label he could never truly shed. But even as we acknowledge the immense psychological and professional weight he carried, we must never overlook the incredible resilience of Jay Silverheels. To navigate such a challenging landscape, to continually perform with grace, professionalism, and quiet dignity while enduring these profound indignities speaks volumes about the man. He wasn't just an actor. He was, in his own way, a silent advocate, a quiet pioneer whose very existence on screen, however flawed the role, undeniably opened doors and planted crucial seeds for future generations. His unwavering commitment to his craft, even within the frustrating confines of a stereotypical role, laid a critical foundation. He inspired countless Indigenous youth who, for the very first time, saw a reflection of themselves, however distorted, on the national stage. Today, Jay Silverheels' story resonates with more power and profound poignancy than ever before. It serves as a vital historical lens through which we can scrutinize Hollywood's often troubled past and, more importantly, inform its crucial future. His truth isn't just about the personal struggles of a single actor. It's about the ongoing, vital struggle for authentic representation, for equitable pay, for safe and respectful working environments, and for the dignified portrayal of all cultures. His enduring legacy demands that we continue to challenge outdated stereotypes, to uplift and amplify diverse voices, and to ensure that the sacrifices of pioneers like him were not in vain. The man who smiled on camera while enduring silent suffering ultimately left an indelible mark, not just as Tonto, but as Jay Silverheels. A powerful testament to courage, resilience, and the enduring human quest for dignity in a world too often blind to it. His truth, finally brought to light, ensures that his spirit continues to inspire, reminding us that true understanding begins when we listen deeply to the voices that were once, for far too long, silenced.